Imagine a complex weather system forming over the ocean. Individually, the factors that play a low pressure system here, a temperature gradient there, a certain amount of moisture in the air might not be enough to cause significant trouble. But when these individual elements converge in a specific way, they can amplify each other, creating a perfect storm of unprecedented power. A hurricane is not simply the sum of its parts. It is a synergistic event where each factor intensifies the others, leading to a destructive force far greater than any single element could produce alone. The human mind, with its myriad of cognitive biases and psychological tendencies, is also susceptible to these kinds of perfect storms. Charlie Munger, with his characteristic flair for coining memorable terms, labeled this phenomenon the Lollapalooza Effect. Just as a confluence of weather patterns can create a superstorm, a confluence of psychological biases acting together in the same direction can lead to spectacularly irrational and often disastrous outcomes. The term Lollapalooza itself, in Munger's usage, evokes the idea of a grand, over-the-top spectacle, a powerful and overwhelming event. This is precisely what happens when several psychological tendencies combine. Their effects don't just add up, they multiply, creating a total effect that is often far greater than the sum of its individual parts. Understanding the Lollapalooza effect is crucial because it helps explain some of the most perplexing and consequential failures in history, failures where intelligent, well-meaning individuals or groups made shockingly irrational decisions. These are not simply cases of one or two biases at play. They are situations where a cluster of biases aligned perfectly, creating a vortex of flawed thinking. Consider the classic example of a salesman using multiple persuasive techniques. He might first establish likability, liking, loving tendency, then create a sense of scarcity, scarcity tendency, then subtly imply social proof tendency, by mentioning others who have already bought the product. If the customer is also feeling tired or stressed, their deprival superreaction tendency, the pain of missing out, might be amplified. None of these biases acting alone might be enough to close the sale. But when they all converge at the right moment, they can create an almost irresistible urge to buy, even if the product is not needed or wanted. The danger of the Lollapalooza effect is that it creates a kind of psychological blindness. When multiple biases are pulling us in the same direction, our critical thinking faculties become severely impaired. We become less likely to question our assumptions, to seek out contradictory evidence, or to consider alternative perspectives. The combined force of these tendencies creates a powerful illusion of correctness and certainty, even when we are heading directly towards a cognitive cliff. In the subsequent parts of this exploration, we will delve into specific historical and contemporary examples of the Lollapalooza effect in action. We will examine how seemingly isolated biases can intertwine to create catastrophic failures in business, finance, and even public policy. By understanding this powerful psychological multiplier, we can become better equipped to recognize its formation in ourselves and in the systems around us, and hopefully steer clear of its destructive path. The key is to learn to identify the conditions that allow these mental perfect storms to brew in the first place. To truly grasp the devastating power of the Lollapalooza effect, we must examine a moment when the stakes were not just money or reputation, but human lives. Let us travel back to the 28th of January, 1986. The place is Cape Canaveral, Florida. The event is the launch of the Space Shuttle Challenger, mission STS-51L. There is immense public excitement. On board is Krista McAuliffe, the first teacher in space, a symbol of a new era of civilian space travel. For NASA, this launch is a crucial demonstration of the shuttle program's reliability and routine nature. The pressure to launch on schedule is immense. But behind the scenes, a storm was brewing. The weather in Florida that morning was unusually cold, with temperatures dipping below freezing. The night before, a frantic teleconference took place between NASA officials and engineers from Morton Thiokol, the contractor responsible for the shuttle's solid rocket boosters. The Thiokol engineers presented a clear and urgent case. The rubber O-rings that sealed the joints of the boosters were not designed to function in such cold weather. They became brittle, lost their resiliency, and could fail to create a proper seal. Their recommendation, based on their own engineering data, was unequivocal: do not launch. What happened next is a textbook example of a catastrophic Lollapalooza effect in action. The decision was not made on the basis of engineering fact, but was swept away by a confluence of powerful psychological tendencies that converged on the managers in that room. First, the authority misinfluence tendency. The client, NASA, the ultimate authority in the room, was clearly disappointed and frustrated by the recommendation to delay. A NASA official famously challenged the engineers, asking, "When do you want me to launch? Next April?" This created immense pressure on the Morton Thiokol managers to please the authority figure. Second, the social proof tendency. As the debate wore on, the momentum in the room began to shift away from the engineers' cautious stance and towards a can-do management solution. When one's own judgment is uncertain, the tendency to follow the perceived consensus of the group is powerful. The pressure to conform, to be a team player, began to mount. Third, incentive caused bias. NASA was powerfully incentivized to maintain its ambitious launch schedule to secure future funding and prove its commercial viability. Morton Thiokol, as a contractor, was powerfully incentivized to be seen as reliable and cooperative to win future contracts. A no-launch recommendation could be perceived as a failure on their part, damaging their relationship with their most important customer. Their incentive was not just to be right, but to be agreeable. Fourth, the commitment and consistency tendency. NASA had publicly committed to this launch. The media was assembled. The world was watching. To back down at the last minute would be to publicly admit a problem, which would be inconsistent with their carefully cultivated image of infallible competence. The desire to remain consistent with their prior public statements was a powerful psychological force. This perfect storm of biases, the pressure to please authority, to conform with the group, to act according to one's incentives, and to remain consistent with past commitments, created a Lollapalooza. The Thiokol managers caught in this vortex made a fatal decision. They overruled their own engineers. They told NASA to proceed with the launch. 73 seconds after liftoff, as the world watched, the Challenger shuttle was engulfed in a ball of fire. A catastrophic failure in one of the O-ring joints, just as the engineers had predicted, had allowed hot gas to escape, leading to the structural collapse of the external fuel tank. All 7 astronauts were lost. The Challenger tragedy was not, at its core, a technical failure. The technical flaw was known. It was a human judgment failure driven by a Lollapalooza effect. The rational, data-driven case presented by the engineers was rendered irrelevant by a powerful converging wave of psychological biases that overwhelmed the decision-makers. It stands as a chilling testament to the fact that intelligence and expertise are no match for a confluence of psychological forces pulling the mind in the same disastrous direction. The Lollapalooza effect is not confined to the high-pressure environment of a NASA control room. It can also operate on a vast societal scale, involving millions of independent individuals who, under the influence of a shared psychological storm, all begin to make the same fatally flawed decision. To witness this, we need only look at the lead-up to the 2008 global financial crisis, specifically the creation and collapse of the U.S. housing bubble. The environment in the early 2000s was ripe for a Lollapalooza. Interest rates were low, making borrowing cheap. There was a widespread and deeply ingrained cultural belief that real estate prices never go down. And there was a political and social push to expand homeownership to as many people as possible. These conditions set the stage, but it was a powerful confluence of incentives and psychological biases that turned this environment into a ticking time bomb. First, and most powerfully, was incentive-caused bias, which acted as the engine of the entire system. The mortgage broker. Their income was based not on the quality of the loans they wrote, but on the quantity. This created a powerful incentive to approve as many mortgages as possible, leading to the creation of subprime loans for borrowers with little to no ability to repay. The investment banker. Wall Street firms like Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns were incentivized to buy these risky mortgages. bundle them into complex financial products known as collateralized debt obligations, CDOs, and then sell them to investors, collecting huge fees in the process. Crucially, they did not retain the long-term risk. Their incentive was to move the product, not to ensure its quality. The CEO and a risk-free bonus. The CEO's bonus and stock options were tied to soaring quarterly profits. They were powerfully incentivized to encourage JJIT teams to take on more and more risk because it generated spectacular short-term returns. Second, this engine was fueled by an immense wave of social proof tendency. Millions of ordinary people watched their neighbors, friends, and colleagues buy homes, flip them for huge profits, and use their houses as ATMs by refinancing. The narrative was everywhere. Everyone is getting rich in real estate. This created a powerful herd mentality. The fear of being the only one left out became overwhelming. It seemed not just safe, but downright foolish not to participate, regardless of the price. Third, this mass delusion was given a stamp of legitimacy by the authority misinfluence tendency. The complex and risky CDOs, filled with subprime mortgages, were given AAA ratings, the highest possible rating for safety, by the official credit rating agencies like Moody's and S&P. These agencies were seen as the infallible, impartial referees of the financial world. In reality, they were also subject to their own incentive-caused bias, as they were paid by the very investment banks whose products they were rating. This stamp of approval from a trusted authority allowed pension funds, institutional investors, and even foreign governments to buy these toxic assets with a false sense of security, effectively shutting off their critical thinking. Finally, all of this was wrapped in a blanket of psychological denial. As the bubble grew larger and the risks became more apparent, many insiders were powerfully motivated to ignore the warning signs. The profits were too enormous, the bonuses were too life-changing, the party was too much fun. To acknowledge the reality of the bubble would have meant turning off the music and ending the gravy train. It was psychologically easier to deny the risk, to believe that this time is different, than to confront the impending catastrophe. This planetary-scale Lollapalooza toxic brew of perverse incentives, amplified by mass social proof, sanctioned by flawed authority, and protected by widespread denial to the inevitable outcome. The bubble burst. Millions of people lost their homes. The world's largest financial institutions collapsed or required massive taxpayer bailouts, plunging the global economy into the worst recession since the Great Depression. It was a stark demonstration that the same psychological forces that can bring down a single space shuttle can, when aligned on a grander scale, bring the entire world to its knees. Having witnessed the destructive power of the Lollapalooza effect, from the tragedy of a single spacecraft to the meltdown of the global economy, it is easy to feel a sense of intellectual helplessness. If brilliant engineers, powerful executives, and entire societies can be swept away by these psychological storms, what chance does an individual have? A great deal, it turns out. But it requires not just good intentions, but the deliberate construction of mental and procedural defenses. Munger's life work points to several powerful antidotes. Antidote number 1, the lattice work of mental models. The first and most fundamental defense is a broad, multidisciplinary understanding of the world. Lollapalooza effects often gain their power because the decision makers are trapped within a single, narrow perspective. The NASA managers were thinking like managers, not engineers. The investment bankers were thinking like traders, not historians or sociologists. They lacked the tools to see the other forces at play. A lattice work of mental models, drawn from the big ideas of psychology, history, physics, biology, and engineering, provides you with multiple lenses to view the same problem. When confronted with a decision, you don't just see the financial case, you can also see the psychological pressures at play, like social proof or incentive-caused bias. You can recognize historical precedents for the current situation. You can understand the underlying mathematical or physical realities. This multi-layered view breaks the tunnel vision that is the fertile ground for a Lollapalooza. It allows you to see the storm clouds gathering from different directions long before they converge. Antidote number 2, the discipline checklist. While a broad education is the strategic defense, a checklist is the tactical frontline defense. Munger was a huge advocate for checklists, not as a substitute for thought, but as a tool to force better thought, especially under pressure. Human memory is fallible. Our minds are lazy. When multiple biases are pushing us in one direction, it's easy to forget to ask the most basic, critical questions. Imagine a pre-decision checklist for any major commitment. It would not be complex. It would be a simple list of the most potent psychological tendencies. Before signing the deal, you would be forced to ask, incentives. Have I accounted for the incentives of every party involved, including my own? Authority. Am I making this decision because the data supports it or because an authority figure is telling me to? Social proof. Am I doing this because it's a good idea or because everyone else is doing it? Commitment and consistency. Am I proceeding because it's the right path or because I don't want to admit my previous actions were a mistake? Inversion. Have I spent as much time thinking about how this could fail as I have about how it could succeed? This simple, methodical process acts as a circuit breaker. It interrupts the smooth, unthinking cascade of biases and forces a moment of rational, structured reflection. Antidote number 3, the institutional devil's advocate. Many Lollapaloozas, like the Challenger disaster, are amplified by groupthink. The desire to maintain harmony and consensus within a group can be a powerful suppressor of dissent. To combat this, one must institutionalize dissent. This means formally designating a person or a team to serve as the devil's advocate. Their role, their incentive is not to agree, but to vigorously and intelligently argue against the prevailing consensus. Their job is to find every flaw, every hidden risk, and every reason why the proposed plan might fail. This technique, when used sincerely, forces the group to confront uncomfortable truths and consider alternatives. It breaks the spell of social proof and ensures that critical information is not swept under the rug in the name of teamwork. These antidotes are not magic bullets. They are the tools of a craftsman. They require discipline, humility, and a conscious commitment to a rational process. They are the wax in the ears and the rope on the mast that Odysseus used to navigate past the sirens. They are the defenses we must build before the storm hits. Because once we are caught in the vortex of a Lollapalooza, our unaided judgment is often the first casualty. We have now defined the Lollapalooza effect, witnessed its power to topple everything from spacecraft to economies, and armed ourselves with a set of rational antidotes, the latticework of mental models, the discipline checklist, and the institutional devil's advocate. It would be tempting to conclude, then, that we are now immune, that we have found the permanent cure for irrationality, but this would be the final and perhaps most dangerous cognitive error of all. The ultimate lesson of the Lollapalooza effect is that the struggle for rationality is not a battle that can be won once and for all. It is a lifelong practice. The psychological tendencies that converge to create these storms are not external viruses that can be vanquished. They are a fundamental, baked-in part of our human nature. They are with us always. Therefore, rationality is not a destination at which you arrive. It is a process that you must engage in day after day. It is like physical hygiene or fitness. You do not shower once and declare yourself clean for life. You do not go to the gym for a year and then consider your health to be permanently secured. It requires constant, humble maintenance. This brings us to the ultimate safeguard, the master antidote that underpins all the others, a profound and permanent state of intellectual humility. The moment you begin to believe you have mastered psychology and are no longer susceptible to these biases is the exact moment you become most vulnerable to them. A truly rational person is not someone who has eliminated their biases, but someone who is acutely and perpetually aware of their own cognitive fallibility. As the physicist Richard Feynman famously said, the first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. Understanding the Lollapalooza effect fundamentally changes the way you see the world. You begin to read news stories, analyze business decisions, and even observe personal arguments through a new lens. You see them not as isolated events driven by single causes, but as potential systems of converging forces. You become less quick to judge individuals as simply greedy or stupid, and more inclined to analyze the systems of incentives and psychological pressures that shape their behavior. The goal, then, is not to achieve a state of flawless, computer-like logic. That is impossible for a human being. The goal is to build robust processes and habits of mind like the checklist and the lattice work that serve as guardrails. These systems don't eliminate the possibility of error, but they dramatically reduce its probability. They are the structures that keep us on a more rational path more of the time. The commitment to this process, to the constant, humble work of checking and rechecking your own thinking, is the very essence of the Munger-esque approach to wisdom. It is a quieter, less glamorous, but far more reliable path than the search for dazzling brilliance. This lifelong journey of building a more reliable framework for thought, of practicing the art of not fooling yourself, is the central mission of our work here at Think Like Munger. We are dedicated to deconstructing the powerful mental models that allow for superior decision-making, helping you build your own latticework of worldly wisdom. If this deep dive into the Lollapalooza effect has helped you better understand the hidden forces of human misjudgment, please show your support by liking this video. To continue this journey with us, be sure to subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell. You'll be joining a community of rational thinkers committed to a life of continuous learning. As always, check the description for a link to our free Top 5 Mental Models checklist. Now, we would love to hear from you. In the comments below, share a time when you noticed several small factors combining to create a surprisingly large, good or bad, outcome in your own life or work. Thank you for thinking with us.